Welcome to The Verge Live. I'm Ross Miller.
I'm David Pierce.
And this is the Moto X.
So is this.
That's also the Moto X.
His is
We've got
pink.
a lot of Moto X's. This is a really nice one. We've got a cool video we're going to show you, and when we come back from that, we'll be answering all your questions about the Moto X. Tweet at us, hashtag VergeQA, and in about 6 minutes, give or take, we'll be back answering all that, so stay tuned.
Google bought Motorola 14 months ago, and today in New York City, we're getting our first look at the first device they built together. This is the Moto X, and it's really what happens when Google becomes a hardware manufacturer. But this story really goes back a week, to Verizon's announcement of a lineup of new droids. Motorola made clear to us that Moto X is the future of the company, that it's where Motorola is headed, but it's hedging that future a little bit.
Droids have a special place. They go after people who are looking for a lot of power, top-end hardware specs. They're looking for phones that have a unique design character to them.
The new phone isn't quite as angry as your average droid. I still don't know if it's called the X or the Moto X, but whatever you call it, the phone is beautiful. Its curved glass and plastic front has tiny bezels and a big, bright display, and the back curves from flat edges to a slightly convex center that nestles perfectly in your palm. Nearly everything else about the phone is negotiable. You can choose how much storage you get in your Moto X. You can also choose the front panel, either black or white. There are 18 options for the back panel, which you can also engrave, plus 7 for the accents, which are the ring around the camera lens and the buttons. The colors look and feel different, from a woven black to a matte and rubbery gray. And if you don't like the one you pick, just send it back within 2 weeks and get another. Assembling phones to order like this is complicated, and it takes time. So Motorola moved its operations to Fort Worth, Texas, in a huge factory where it assembles all its phones.
We realized that it was really critical to be able to deliver phones to people in less than 5 days. And so that's why we moved manufacturing. We took all of our supply chain and we made it based in Fort Worth. And there's approximately 2,000 employees that put the phones together. It's a complicated assembly process. And they're working at our partner Flextronics, who we do our manufacturing with. We also, of course, have most of our designers, engineers, most of our employees at Motorola are in America as well. And so putting our manufacturing close to our engineering is a really, really nice feedback loop for us.
Buyers get to help decide what their phone looks like, but the specs themselves are left up to Google and Motorola. The two companies made a big bet. They essentially built a mid-range phone. It has a 4.7-inch 720p OLED screen in an era of 5-inch 1080p panels.
And we had a lot of debates about what the density of display, 1080 versus 720, what the right size is. So it started with size to really find the sweet spot, and then we decided the resolution to be what we thought was ideal. We could go and make a higher resolution screen, but it would just suck battery and no one would know the difference, right? Because we saw that and we knew that.
The screen's a little pink to our eyes, but otherwise looks really good. The Moto X has Motorola's X8 chip, which really is little more than an off-the-shelf Snapdragon processor, plus a couple of additional cores. It's not a bleeding edge or even necessarily top-notch processor. But it goes back to the simple message of the Moto X. It's not about what your phone can do theoretically. It's about what it does do and what you do with it.
One of the things we found is a little bit of a curious behavior was people turning their phones off and on about 60 times a day. And so we developed something we think is really cool and very useful, which we call active display. It lets the user know that real basic information, and it shows it sort of right on the screen. In this case, like, it comes on and I can just go right up to the text message. It'll take me right to the message, so it's really fast.
Part of the reason we used the AMOLED display is that we could selectively illuminate one portion of the display, which gives us a very kind of energy efficient way to show this.
The Moto X knows when you're in a car and jumps into driving mode automatically. It knows your voice and only your voice. Just say, "Okay, Google now," and command your phone as you please. You can make and end calls, get directions, or look up almost anything without ever needing to touch your phone or even turn it on. The phone runs nearly pure stock Android, version 4.2.2. Somehow, even though it's owned by Google, Motorola still can't get the latest version of its software.
There is a clear separation between Motorola and Android, but we also, of course, have quite a bit of Google influence. It doesn't help us, per se, upgrade any faster. There's no difference in operation there than any other OEM. But our strategy does, Motorola's strategy does, which is to remove a lot of the customizations that have plagued Android phones for a long time and really just focused right on the core Android user experience, which we think has evolved to a great place.
It has unlocked an opportunity for us to pursue a path that before we thought about, but really wasn't really going to work for us at Motorola, given what our products were and what we stood for. It allowed us to design in a different way.
Google's been involved with the Moto X design throughout, and there's even a program for sharing employees between the two companies. It's almost like Motorola hasn't figured out what to do with Google yet, and Google hasn't figured out how to use its new hardware arm either. It may not be a Google Play Edition phone, unlocked and an Android purist's dream, but the Moto X is fast, smooth, and powerful. The only thing that didn't work very well was the quick launch camera. You wiggle your wrist like you're jimmying a lock, and it'll jump straight to the camera no matter what it was doing before. It's great, it just doesn't always work. The camera takes good pictures too, but it has very few features. It might be too simple. But Motorola believes in simple, in making phones that fit our lives perfectly without changing them. It believes we want phones that do what we want them to do, and they look the way we want them to look, and everything else from spec sheets to SKUs is secondary.
I think 2 years ago the company made 45 phones. We're obviously down to a much smaller set, and we think it's critical to do a smaller number of things much better.
At $199 on contract and available on all 4 major US carriers, we're gonna find out if simple can win. Motorola is taking on the Galaxy S4, the HTC One, the iPhone 5, and even its own line of droids. Those phones all have more power and more features. Motorola is fighting fire with glow sticks here. But its glow stick is pretty, it's really easy to use, and it doesn't go out so quickly. Maybe there's something to be said for glow sticks.
Glow sticks.
Glow sticks.
Glow sticks. David, I know you're exhausted. You haven't slept much. You wrote that huge piece. It's on theverge.com if you want to look at it after you watch this, of course. But I want to get your thoughts. You've been playing this a lot lately. What do you think of the Moto X?
So, for me, this whole thing kind of comes out of what I felt about the HTC One and the Galaxy S4, where it was really design versus things it does, right? And this kind of takes that to a totally new level, where it's not about what it does. And to some extent, that's sort of a hedge for Motorola for not putting great specs into this phone. But they're focusing on design, they're focusing on how it feels, they're focusing on all this stuff that I think actually matters in a way that the difference between dual core and quad core really doesn't matter. And I think that's fascinating. I think this phone in some ways is not perfect. The more I use this AMOLED screen, the more I don't really like it.
Well, let's talk about what is actually on this right now. I mean,
sure.
Motorola's made a big deal about saying specs do not matter, but here are the specs that are there. It's a 4.3 inch or 4.7?
4.7.
4.7 inch.
And
720p.
Like, I can't.
This feels good.
I can't overestimate, I guess, how small this thing feels for a 4.7 inch phone. Like, we didn't believe that spec when we first saw it. It just feels really good, and you can actually legitimately use it in one hand, unlike basically every other phone this size I've ever seen.
Right.
Which is a big deal.
It is. And like this feels good. There's like it's a nice weight too.
Yeah, it is.
And like when I heard that I was doing this like customized plastic bags, I thought it was going to feel cheap. But testament to Motorola, it actually is pretty sturdy.
Yeah, no,
I think
it is.
so.
And,
I mean,
well, it's really interesting. So I was at the event this morning,
right?
And they were showing off. You know, you can customize the back. There are all these different options, and then they're like, we also have these cases, and that was literally all he said. He was like,
really?
I don't want to. We make cases. It was basically, please, for the love of God, do not buy them. That was it. It was great. And then they talked for like 30 minutes about headphones. But they're clearly, that's what they're trying to do.
Does this come with headphones?
So what's cool is they're partnering with Seoul Republic, who's like, they're sort of the hipster cool kid of the headphone industry. And what they're doing is making headphones that are the same color as your phone.
Right.
So when you go on the Moto Maker thing, it'll suggest a pair of headphones that look just like your phone. Mm-hmm. And you can get any color you want, but it suggests it. So that's cool. And Seoul Republic makes good headphones. So that's kind of neat. But the point is it feels good. You don't have to, with the Galaxy S4, you either have to buy a new back or put on a case to make it feel decent. And this just comes out of the box and feels good and works well.
Right.
But they made a bunch of sacrifices to get to that place, which is,
and let's talk about the sacrifices. And like to me, like I'm actually very happy with this. I've been going back and forth. We've argued probably 3 of the last 10 hours over this nonstop. I know you've been writing. Sorry about that. But what are the sacrifices have been made to make what essentially Motorola's flagship, albeit mid-range phone?
Sure. So the big argument that I think you can make for really high-end specs is that every Android phone kind of becomes terrible over the course of its life. And you sign a 2-year contract to get this phone. You want it to be good. And really only Apple has a reputation for continuing to be good over the course of its entire lifespan. Mm-hmm. But And so the counter to that is basically just buy the best specs you possibly can and hope they last the longest.
Right.
This doesn't have that. This is already sort of behind the times. It's a Snapdragon S4 Pro, which is a good processor. It's a very good processor, but it's 2 steps below the best ones that are out there, and God only knows where we'll be 2 years from now, like how many steps back that'll be. It's a 720p screen instead of 1080p, which the argument is essentially that it's really diminishing returns, and I tend to agree with that. But it's also, who knows what we're going to be able to do with more pixels and more resolution in 2 years.
Right. And the trade-off that you kept saying for it was battery life. And I'm actually, if they sacrifice processor and like screen resolution for battery life, if they actually get what they're claiming is 24 full hours.
So that was really exciting. So everybody says
Hard
a full
to believe,
day.
but
Right. Everybody says we'll get a full day of battery life, and almost everybody's lying. And when you ask them, they're like, well, a full day is 8 hours because that's your work day.
Right.
It's like, well, that's not a day.
But also,
that's 8 hours.
it's like, oh, it's 8 hours idle, not browsing,
right.
listening to music locally, not on Spotify.
Right. But then Rick gets up this morning at the event and says a full day, and somebody immediately goes, well, how long is a full day? Right. And he says 24 hours, and then sort of gets this smirky smile on his face because everybody sort of was taken aback by it. But that's huge, and that's another thing where it's like that matters way more to most people than the cores in their processor.
Right.
For me, it's like, if you give me a phone that lasts as long as I need it to, I will make lots and lots of sacrifices to get there. And the question is, do you make the right ones? And I still don't know with this, honestly. I need to spend more time with it.
Right.
And I need to, I really want to see where this is in a year. But for right now, they're thinking very much the right way, which is, what do people need? And it's, I need a phone that isn't dead at 6 p.m., and I need a phone that feels good and works well. And like, this is all of those things.
Right, and that's the thing that scares me the most about this. And we have been going back and forth. I like this phone, and there's reasons I don't, we'll get to it, especially price and things like that. But if in a year from now, this still feels like it does now, I'll be happy. Like, we're getting to the point, like,
fair.
99, maybe 100% of the apps I want will work just as well on this as it will the S4. Like, the processor, I don't need that extra. Developers are making for, this dual core processor right now, because that's what everyone's going to have and buy. That being said, we thought the Nexus 7, the original one, would be better for a while.
Sure.
We were wrong.
Well, that turned out to be a weird software thing in a lot of ways.
But, because 4.3 now makes the old Nexus 7 faster.
Right, which is sort of remarkable. And that's, the guys at Motorola didn't use that as an example yesterday, but they might as well have. And they were saying, our hardware is already beyond what we need from it, and now it's about making the software to catch up. And we can use the software to better our hardware. Mm-hmm. And I don't have a ton of evidence that that's true, but it seems to be. I mean, we have a little bit of evidence that that's true, and I think you can build on top of good hardware a lot better than you can build on top of bad hardware. And this is good hardware, but it's not great. It's just this weird balancing game that I can't
it's the
figure
fundamental
out where
question.
Motorola
Like, are we
is.
at the point where hardware specs are plateauing to the point where we're getting what we need?
Right.
But before we get into the specs, I do want to talk about the obvious thing here, which is the colors. Now, this phone is assembled in America.
Yes.
Designed, engineered, and assembled in America. That's step 1, 2, and 4. Step 3, of course, is parts are being made outside the country.
Which is
country.
everywhere. And just
everywhere.
to be super clear, that's only for people in America. So if you live in America, your phone is assembled in America. Otherwise, I don't know.
You don't know.
All hell breaks loose. I don't know.
Wait,
they were oddly unclear about that. He basically kept just saying America.
They're not
Just
talking
stop
international.
America. That was it. I was like, okay.
All right. Apologies to every non-American person interested in this phone.
Look, it's not me. It's Motorola.
No, I'm
They
not
did it.
apologizing for you.
Let's
Kind of am.
A little bit.
But let's talk about the back. So there's 18 backs.
Yeah.
Does that include? Because I know I was with you a little bit before. Does that include the wooden backs?
It doesn't. So there's 18 available at day 1.
Okay.
And wood is they're testing wood.
They're testing wood.
They're testing wood. They don't have wood. They're thinking about having wood.
Can you please find another way of saying that?
So what they were saying, and I thought this was actually really interesting, is that wood is a completely different kind of material to use. Just move on.
I'm moving.
Okay.
I'm moving.
It's a totally different kind of material, especially for things like RF frequencies and some of the cellular stuff.
And I remember it's like NTT Docomo at least 2 or 3 years ago. We were in Tokyo for one of the trade shows, and like they were showing off wooden phones.
Right.
But like same issues. There's frequency concerns and all that.
And so what they've been doing is testing a bunch of different kinds of wood, and I think the challenge that they're having is figuring out which one works best. So it's coming out the 4th quarter of this year, and it'll be wood. And we saw a prototype of it yesterday, and I really liked it. I don't know what you thought. It felt It feels cool.
I liked it. I just
kind of
wonder what it's
gimmicky,
going to be
but-
like in the rain.
Yeah,
Because I'm
that's a
going
really
to get
good
the phone
point.
caught in the rain.
Your phone shrinks a little
Just like
bit.
a little bit.
Yeah.
It starts growing moss.
That would be amazing.
That would be
I would pay extra for that. I have no problem with that.
It's a Chia Pet widget on the back of the phone. No, so we've got 18 colors at launch.
Yep.
Any carrier exclusives that we talked about, or is it just the 18?
Well, this is the weird thing. Is all of the black and white. This is black, and there's also white,
Okay.
which looks like this but white.
But textured. So black and white are always textured.
A little bit. So there's a much sort of smoother matte black that doesn't have quite this look to it, but it's
Okay.
always it's the same kind of rubbery, grippy.
But those two
feel.
are separate, consider. Like,
Right.
there's black and black textured.
Yeah. There's black, and then a different
White
black.
and white.
It's like paint swatches, right?
Right.
There's like egg cream and cream egg and.
Is there egg cream and cream egg?
I hope not. But so you can get either of those two when the phones come out on the carriers, which is at the end of this month or early September. But for now, AT&T has an exclusive on the Moto Maker software, which means if you want one of the crazy colors, you can only buy it on AT&T, which makes absolutely no sense to me. It's so nice. It's so pretty. Like, don't you want this phone? I want that phone. But you can't buy it unless you're on AT&T. Which strikes me
Well.
as completely insane. For now, like everyone I asked would go up to me and be like, "It's an exclusive for now."
Yeah,
so
there's
it's
that
gonna
asterisk.
change.
You literally see the asterisk
Right.
pop up next to them.
Right.
It's like, we're going to give it to AT&T first, but just you wait.
It's just like a big eye in the sky
Just you wait.
winking at me. Yeah, exactly.
But no, it's great. So at launch, 18 colors, 7 accents, and the accents are the buttons.
which I actually think is super cool.
Right. So the accents are what? It's this.
It's the ring
here.
around the camera here.
Right.
And there is sort of a ring around the buttons that's a little bit
Okay.
harder to see. But it's really cool, and it's a clever way. For me, like, I'm not sure I'd want a pink phone forever. I'd want a pink phone for like a week, and then I'd be over having a pink phone.
But
But at the same time, you can have like a little bit of sort of flair to it
Right.
without. Because my problem with having an iPhone is everyone I know who has an iPhone, it's hopeless.
Right.
I give other people my phone. I take other people's phone. It's just, it's
that's
kind of boring.
That's why you do cases too.
True.
It just
True.
differentiates.
Yeah. So I like the idea that your phone, even sort of very subtly, can look like your phone.
So what was it? 18 backs,
Yep.
7 accents.
Yep, and 2 fronts.
2 fronts, black or white.
Yep.
And 504 permutations, basically.
That includes 2 storage options.
includes,
So
and
it's- yeah.
2 more storage options, 16 and 32 gigs.
Right.
So 504 choices.
For now, and there's going to be
300
more.
of those are probably very ugly, but they'll let you do those.
Right, yeah, that's fair.
And-
No, but they should, and it was funny. Motorola's doing this big promotion with people on Facebook where they're basically saying, "Show us what else you want," and sort of the sky's the limit. People are just designing wacky things, and they put up a bunch with the weirdest names ever. One was called Binary Curious, and it was just like ones and zeros on the
Binary
back. Of it.
Curious.
That's what they were like. This is funny. we should do that.
We're getting to the point where, like, I remember Dell years ago, like, their big thing was buy a laptop
Right.
with us. It's kind of fat, but design anything you want in the back, or we'll find some artists do a really good job. And is that kind of where Motorola is going
Well,
with
so
this?
that's the thing is what it kind of is. That's the floor for Motorola. If this goes poorly, that's what it is. It's covering a crappy phone with not nice looking shell. And in that case, like, I could just buy a case for my good phone. Everybody wins. But in this case, it's, I don't know. I'm so torn about this. And the part that really bums me out is this could have been the phone that changed everything, right? Like, if this was a Nexus phone, if it came on all 4 carriers but was totally stock Android, was gonna get the updates immediately, was, you know, sold unlocked for $299 like the Nexus 4, the universe might have exploded. My head would be somewhere else right now, and everyone here would already be in line to buy one.
And the
but
thing
they
that
didn't
kills
do
me-
that, which sucks.
And here's the thing that kills me, and we've argued back and forth on what this means. Motorola is proud, very proud to say that we're an OEM of Google's, like, we're not given any special preferential treatment. At the same time, it's almost like saying, we know Google bought us for the patents, and they don't care what we do, so we'll make a good phone.
Right, which is great. And so they have all this time to actually make good phones. I was at the event this morning, and they were talking about how they went to Google with a bunch of ideas. So I guess they have, I'm not totally sure of the setup, but it sounds like they have basically update meetings with the Google leadership.
Right.
And there was somebody at the event this morning who was worried that Larry Page was going to call and be like, "So, Moto X, I really love the name. Let's change that." But so they said early on they went to the leadership team and, you know, laid out a bunch of prototypes and were like, "Here's what we focus grouped. Here's what we found." And the immediate and overwhelming feedback was, "We need more data." So they went back. They went around the world. They have this big archive of thousands of people's handprints.
Right.
They did tons of focus groups, and they really got to, it seems like, take their time and try to figure out what everybody wants out of a cell phone. And at some level, they kind of built the phone that everybody wants, which is not necessarily a good thing, in that you end up in this awkward middle where everything is pretty good and nothing is great.
Right. I mean, because you see like, generalization.
Sure.
Broad generalization. There's 3 different kind of design groups. There's designed by vision, and that's largely like your Steve Jobs and Johnny Ive doing their thing. There's designed by committee, which is, I'm just gonna say it's Samsung. I mean, or something. It's like they're kind of figured out as a big group, and then there's designed by data models, like an incredible amount of data. It sounds like. And we were
that's
talking
a very
earlier
googly
too.
thing to do too, right? They're famous for having the 41 shades of blue on the home screen. There's that guy. I wound up reading it today. His letter quitting was like, I went in and I had to argue 3, 4, or 5 pixels for a border. Like, I'm sure they did that on this. And I'm sure they focus grouped it, and I'm sure they have tons of data and reasons why and usage response, and like, it's crazy.
Right. But I mean, that's the thing, like this is form and function. This is fashion, actually. Sorry. There is function, it's functional enough, that's what they said.
It's functional fashion.
It's functional fashion, yeah. We're gonna make something that looks pretty, and I will say, this is the AT&T model, right? There's no AT&T logo on this.
Oh no, I'm sorry. That one's not the AT&T model.
So
they will have logos on them, and just little tiny ones back here. And
what model is this?
My favorite promise that they made me, that's unlocked, I think.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, you're fancy like that. But so there are little logos back here, but the one thing they promised us over and over yesterday was we will not put anything on the front of the phone. Okay. Verizon can't put anything on there. We won't put anything on there. Google can't put anything on there. And in this case, like, I can live with this. I can live with a little bit of a Verizon logo, and I get why they put it there. Okay. And
then that's, of course, the minimal, enough. Which is what they call the bat wings.
I don't know why I love this. The tiny little bat wings dimple is just awesome. I keep just sitting here and like rubbing this phone. For some reason, I don't totally understand.
While Dave is rubbing the phone, if you have questions, hashtag VergeQA on Twitter. We will get to those questions very shortly. Right before we do, though, I do want to talk about the software just a bit.
Yes.
Android 4.2.2, not 4.3. Again,
another reason
no preferential treatment.
It's not a Nexus phone. Yeah.
Right.
Honestly, like I get the rationale behind not doing the, not having it be a Nexus phone and not getting any particular preferential treatment.
Sure.
But why not? They own them. Like, Samsung gives Samsung preferential treatment.
Right.
That's not a weird thing to do. It's just, I wish they would just own it and be like, look, you can all use this software, but we're going to use it too for our phones. So beat us. That's how you beat the ecosystem, is Google saying, we're going to build killer hardware and killer software. You beat us.
Right. And the thing that, I want to get to software, I want to get to this after that, but real quick, like the thing that I'm surprised they're not doing at launch, a very googly thing to do, is the Play Edition.
Yes.
There's no bone stock Android at launch. There will be a Google Play Edition. They're not saying when, but it's not at launch. Right now, it's, again, AT&T exclusive, locked exclusive. But before we get to that, Android 4.2.2.
Yes.
It's not stock Android. There's a few additions. In fact,
I have like a half dozen Verizon apps here that are just making me sad.
Oof. We do have a few Motorola things. They're not bad, but we've seen them, what, last week?
Yeah, last week.
A lot of the Droid features.
Yeah.
A lot of this, like...
Which is very strange. And they didn't really have a good answer for why. We asked this morning why they announced the Droids last week and then the phone that's supposedly way better than the Droids this week. And all he said was basically, we finished them at the same time. It's like, I mean, I guess that is actually the answer.
All right.
But there doesn't seem to be any particular strategy to it. They just, Verizon called and was like, we want Droids. So they made Droids, and then they've made the Moto X. It's very strange. But I think they're increasingly okay with Droids being a big name for a particular segment of the market. And I think that segment of the market is not the person who's going to buy this. That segment of the market is people who say, holy crap, battery life, and buy monster phones that have big battery life, or say, look at all of the GPUs and like that. And that's great, and there's a market that deserves to be served of that. But this is for like my mom, who's never heard of a GPU, but wants a phone that works well and feels good.
But if your mom is on Verizon...
If I got my mom a Droid, she would hate it. She would cry.
But it's funny because
it might kill her.
It's not
I don't know.
terribly different from this, like in terms of software. Like you've got touchless, which is, it knows when I say, okay, Google now, it does stuff.
Yep.
It knows when you can't. You got to train yours. I got to train mine later. But the thing about Droid to me, and people are going to yell at me for saying this. I was talking to Moto PR earlier. I was like, let me just give an example and see if this fits at all.
Okay.
I told this to the Droid PR guy. I was like, all right, Hollywood makes blockbusters. shitty summer blockbusters that do very well,
Right.
so they can make 10 art house films. Is this art house? And is Droid your shitty summer blockbuster? I didn't say shitties that many times. Mostly not that many times.
Yeah.
But they laughed. They wouldn't say anything. Really great PR people, of course. But
I don't know.
That's my feeling. Like they make so much money with the Droid.
Right.
I don't know if they're actually proud of it at all, though.
No, but I don't think it necessarily matters. That's like the what is that? That's the movie you let Johnny Depp make so that he makes Pirates of the Caribbean for you. But I feel like the weird thing about this is it's such a big play. They're launching it on so many carriers. It's coming to lots of other countries. There's going to be a Google Play edition. This is the play. Like this is how they get into AT&T stores and try to really make noise. So I don't know. I'm not sure. My sense is just that Droid is so powerful and so well known that they'd be stupid to stop selling it, but that they also want to go in a very different direction. So they can basically make this phone, and I would not be surprised if they do this forever, is make the Moto X, slap a bunch of Kevlar on it, give it a better processor, call it a Droid, and charge $100 more for it.
Which I kind of thought they were for a little bit, but actually, technically, they're charging $100 more for this. I felt like...
Well, it depends on which Droid there is, I guess.
Are you talking about the Ultra or the Mini?
All of them.
All of them.
It doesn't matter. This is better.
We're going to get into these questions in just a minute. I just want to get to the last bit.
Yeah.
Because you're talking about carriers, talking about pricing and availability, and everyone's, of course, asking about that. AT&T exclusive, $199 on contract, carrier locked.
Correct.
There is no off-contract price yet.
Correct. And it's not AT&T exclusive. It's on all 4 carriers.
But is it all
customization
$200?
is just AT&T. It's weird. It seems like they don't know. This phone is coming, honestly, it's coming out at a very bizarre time where they don't have a firm release date. It's either coming out later this month or at the beginning of September. They think it's going to be $199, but it's up to the carriers. They think there's going to be a Google Play version, but they don't know when. They think they're going to use Wood, but they don't know when. And all this stuff, it's like they just ran out of time. They're like, I have to show somebody this phone.
I was going to say, do they not actually know, or is it like a wink, we don't know?
I honestly think they don't know because they were so candid about everything else that, saying how much it costs on T-Mobile doesn't seem like it would be that much extra work. But I think I would say it's safe to assume that it will be, the one thing they said for sure is that it will be priced competitively with high-end phones.
Right.
So it'll be as expensive as all the other expensive phones. Like whatever the iPhone costs, this will probably cost that.
And I think, and my conspiracy theory is like, they know it's a mid-range phone, but there was one other phone very recently tried to sell mid-range at a price, HTC first, the Facebook phone, and it was $99 on contract.
Right.
It felt like a piece. It looked like a piece. I loved it. I really did like it.
So did so many people at this office. It's really fun.
As of yesterday, I was still using it. But they priced it to look like you should look at this next to the one, next to the S4, next to the iPhone.
Right.
Well, that one bombed because it was $99. They knew it was mid-range.
Fair.
I almost feel like they charged $200 for this, knowing it was probably $100 on contract worth of it. But they wanted this to say, this is our flagship. Flagship's $200. Specs be damned. We want to make it look just like that.
I agree, and I think you can't make the argument that they're trying to make, which is that specs don't matter without charging as much for the iPhone.
Right.
Because if you come out and say, well, we have all these great things, and also it's $100 cheaper, people are like, oh, well, it's $100 cheaper because the processor is worse. Then that's they lose that argument.
Right.
So I think you're right. I think they came out and did that because it's impossible to make the "we are as good as the iPhone" argument without being as expensive as the iPhone.
Exactly.
Which is a weird thing about our cell phone market, but it's sort of how it is.
But whatever, 24-hour battery life.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, all right, we're going to start taking questions. Again, if you're on Twitter, hashtag VergeQA. We're going to start answering everything we've got here. Not everything, well, a lot of things. First one we've got Techaholic11. Sorry about 1 through 10. He or she asks, how is the camera on the Moto X? Good, bad, or average?
So there's this gesture where you go like this, and nothing happens in my case.
I mean, I do this all the time, nothing happens.
Oh, there we go. I got it to work. Okay, so then it opens up the camera just by doing that gesture. And it'll, and then you just tap anywhere on the screen, and it takes pictures. Right. So that's neat. It's cool for selfies, because you can just be like, what's up? Right.
And I was talking to Jim Wex earlier, is that her name? And he's like, I was like, what if you're drunk? He's like, that's why it's tap anywhere. Because no matter how drunk you are, you can take a picture in front of you.
But the problem with this camera, I think, and I'm curious to know what you think, but the problem with it for me is they got rid of everything. So it's cool because it's super simple, and you can just, tap and take a picture. But if you want to do anything other than tap and take a picture, it's a lot of work. So you have to, you get into the settings, and there's a way you can tap to focus, which is neat. But then it still, once it's focused, it just fires. You can enable a couple of things, but there's just not that much to do here. And one of the things they said was that nobody ever goes into the camera settings. That was one of the things that they found in all of this mountain.
Which is fair. I get that.
Sure, but for someone like me who's paying $200 for a phone that I expect to do all the things I want it to do, like simplicity is great, but only when it's masking complexity. Right. Like when you can do a lot of things and make it look really simple, that's when you've succeeded. But in this case, all they did is pull out a bunch of features and say, hey, there's only one thing you can do. Right. That's simple.
It's almost like
I don't know that counts.
When they design by humans, like no one goes in the settings. It's not because they don't want settings. It's because it's terrible to use. Right. So instead of designing a simpler interface. Well, anyway, look.
But all that said, it does seem to take pretty good pictures. I haven't had nearly enough time to spend with it to say for sure, but it does seem to take pretty good pictures.
Just to take the counter argument, I do think this is a good enough. It's average. And the reason I say that is, if you come from the iPhone, you're used to tap to focus. And I like that feature, but you're also used to tap to exposure. Nothing. And like. Nothing, not working at all? No. You'll get to it.
No, I agree.
Just keep shaking.
And that's the big thing to me is I found myself yesterday, I guess it was you taking this picture,
right.
Where it was the guy standing in front of a really bright window.
Right.
And no matter what you did, he was just pitch dark and everything outside was in focus and exposed and bright.
Right. There's also this hallway.
There has to be a way to fix that. And if you don't give that to me, you blew it.
There was also this hallway where we're kind of walking to that room. There was a dark hallway and there was kind of brighter where the sun was hitting it. And I was just like staring at the dumbest picture. I was like, tap. Does it change the exposure and try to like compensate for the dark area? None of that. So you're just gonna have to hope, pointing it up, is it getting the right exposure you want? Or are you just gonna shake it a little bit, hope for the best?
Right.
That bothered me. But the other thing I usually say is, I've never liked, up until very recently, I've never liked a good Android camera. Like I've never thought there was a good one.
Fair enough.
Until this new crop of phones, and that's the S4, not Android, but the Lumia 1020, if we're gonna talk about flagship devices.
Sure.
I mean, if we're going to move past the spec war and then all that argument, fine. But the things people care about then is design, they nailed it.
Right.
Battery life, they nailed it. Right. And camera, which they tried.
Right. Well, and the Lumia 1020 is actually a really interesting example of this whole thing because you can say all you want that 41 megapixels is useless and nobody needs it, but what 41 megapixels does is enable a whole different kind of using your photos and your camera, where you can zoom and you can rotate and you can make these different photos out of the photos that you take, and that's cool. And that is purely a spec thing, and that's specs for a purpose, which I'm a big fan of. But and Motorola is sort of explicitly not playing that game. It's a 10 megapixel camera, which is plenty for most cases. But that's specs can be meaningful and good and important if they're used properly, I think.
Right. So we got another question. This is a question we've kind of talked a little bit over, and let's just kind of revisit it.
Sure.
I'm going to call out Joe Talaver. Sorry, dude. Thanks for watching. We love you, but sorry. Anyway, Joe had a question. Joe wanted to know, would you pick the X over the HTC One or S4? And this just comes back to, is this actually a flagship phone worth buying, worth spending money on?
So, again, we have not spent nearly enough time with this phone to be able to say for sure. So all of this is with the monstrous grain of salt that is the fact that I've had this in my hand for not very long. But I think for right now, it's just going to depend on who you are. If this is every bit as good as Motorola says it is, let's just grant that.
Sure.
Then yes, probably on my end, because I think what I want is a phone that feels good and is like, I haven't put this down since we've been sitting here. It just feels nice. I like holding this phone. And I felt the same way about the One, which is why I liked it a lot more than the S4.
But the exception, and this is playing devil's advocate, this is not my own opinion, but this is playing devil's advocate, the screen. I know when we were shooting these features, I know we're getting everything ready, one of our directors, John Lagomarsino, who's actually in the control room right now.
It's John and Nilay, by the way, are the two people
yelling
who are
at me in my
just
ear right
so
now,
angry
just
about
say,
screens.
Just go at him for the screen. So I'm going to do it. John, you're welcome. The screen is not Pentile, but it's not great either.
Right. So it's AMOLED.
It's AMOLED.
Which, and this is challenging because I get why they picked AMOLED.
And the S4.
No, the One and the S4 both have much better screens than this. Like much better screens. There's no question about that. I like their logic for it makes sense, which is that you get the the notifications that I still, for the life of me, can't figure out how to actually make come up.
Right.
The phone, like if you have it down on a desk or a table upside down,
Okay.
and then you pick it up, it comes right on. And that's cool. But there's like no way to actually activate it when you want it to, so you might as well just turn your phone on. But so what that's enabled by AMOLED, which lets you light each pixel individually. So they can do that without drawing power from having to light the whole screen.
Right.
But it means, scrolling is kind of janky and ugly, and the colors are oversaturated, and I've complained about this on Samsung phones many, many times. And to hear Motorola say it, people don't care, but I kind of care, and I know John cares.
Right.
And so it's a challenge. It's a trade-off.
And here's
like this phone, I'd like using this more than either of the others, but those are ultimately probably better phones. And that's really the question:
that's the thing.
Which is which? Which
better
matters
screen,
more?
better cameras, better specs. Essentially, like that's the S4 and that's the one.
Right.
But for here, you're getting better battery life and better design. Well,
yeah.
Hopefully.
No, I will say if battery life is what Motorola promises, this is going to be an unbelievably compelling phone.
Right.
Because even if it's not the best out there, all I have to do is walk into a store with, not to keep bringing my mom into this, but with my mom and say, Mom, this is a smartphone. It does everything you need it to do. It has a pretty good camera, and it will last you all day and all night.
Right.
And that's, sold. Beyond that, like, I don't need to walk in and be like, well, it has an Exynos 8 processor and a 5-inch 1080p screen. Like, my mom's asleep by the time I finish that. But if I say it's powerful and has a pretty good camera and lasts all day and is pretty, that's the ballgame for her.
I think so.
And the challenge, I think, is going to be competing with the One on that front, because the One is so similar in that respect.
Or the One Mini.
Right. Well, and then Samsung has all of the branding on its side where everybody knows what it is.
The S4 Active, the S4 Passive, the X4 whatever. I mean, you put any adjective or superlative after that.
Right.
There's a Samsung phone of some inch size next to it.
Well, and Samsung makes great phones. Like,
they do.
We give Samsung a lot of crap for bad
all.
design, but they make great phones.
Right.
It's weird. I don't know quite where Motorola fits into that, but killer battery life would go a long, long way for that.
A couple more questions, and of course, if you have questions, we'll be in comments and forums, and we'll be answering this. There's a huge review coming out, and I'm sorry if we didn't get to your question, but I'm hoping to God they're all answered at some point. A couple more, we'll get to them. We've got one. Do you think that the kind of customization is important for people? Also, do you see this as a plastic iPhone competitor? I mean, this is like talking like this looks. I'm guessing to you on
camera. Does that mean a competitor to the plastic iPhone?
I think so.
Or a plastic iPhone competitor?
Let's talk about both.
Okay.
But I will say, I'm assuming people who are looking at this from the video, from this live show, it probably looks cheaper than it is. This feels sturdy.
Yeah, it does.
This feels surprisingly sturdy.
There is plastic. It's very much made of plastic, but it doesn't feel like a cheap plastic phone by any stretch.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's too good to be a competitor to the plastic iPhone, assuming it's what we think it is, and definitely not a plastic iPhone competitor.
No, which we don't even know what that's going to be. But I mean, but it does speak to like that generation's coming up.
Sure.
And this has to last the 2 years. If you're buying a contract, of course, you're upgrading. You've got this locked in, unless you're T-Mobile, or you're doing the really bad AT&T plan, the really bad
where you pay a
plan.
bunch of money to pay a bunch of money for phones.
Which brings us to, of
Thanks,
course,
AT&T.
this next question. I'm trying to do really good transitions.
Yeah,
this is a learning skill. We've got, what is Motorola betting on? The carrier version of the Moto X or the Google Play edition? What's the difference? What's better? Obviously, the difference is somewhat more stock Android, which is pretty clean as is.
No, you know what the difference is people are going to buy the carrier versions.
Yes.
The Google Play editions are wonderful, and they're going to make a very core set of nerdy people very happy. And a lot of that core set of nerdy people who are very happy are in this office right now.
Sure.
But I mean, you only make a play across all four carriers if you're really buying in. And we've heard rumors about how much money Google is putting into marketing this phone. And if they wanted to just throw it in the Play Store and see what happens, they would have done that. This is a very different play. This is them trying to be that fourth. I mean, I think for all intents and purposes, there are three phones right now. And really only two. There's the iPhone, the GS4, and then slightly below the One. And this is trying to be that fourth phone in every sense in the realm with that. And it's competing on sort of different terms, which I think is smart. I don't know if it's going to work, but I think it's smart. But it's the carriers. The carriers will ultimately be what makes or breaks this device.
Which brings me to the other.
And just one last point.
Of
the
course.
fact that Verizon loves Motorola could be a huge win for this phone.
Well, it could be a huge win for the Droid.
But they're going to be selling this too.
Right.
And the question then becomes, you know, people are going to walk in and they're going to say, hey, you should check out our Droids. And they're like, it's kind of big and bulky and expensive. And they're if they can get them to be like, hey, come check out this other phone before you look at the iPhone, that's a huge win for Motorola. I don't know if that's going to happen, but that's a huge win.
That is true. And that does bring the question, like, it's into the carrier's hands. First question why not do both? Why not just give it unlocked from the start? Are carriers going to be pissed that you're offered a however much phone? To be clear, they've not announced how much the Play Edition is going to be, but if I'm going to guess, $600? Somewhere around that, maybe
fair,
500.
yeah. I mean, if they can come out and make it $299, then, you know, I'll captain my captain.
I'm going to be so pissed that I spent $199 on contract for this.
No, but I think, I don't know. That's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that. I wonder why they're doing it that way, because they're, I guess on one hand, sort of philosophically getting away from the people who buy those phones.
Right.
But on the other hand, like if the people who buy those phones buy that phone, that seems like a win for everybody. I don't know. I'm sort of confused by that strategy too. But I'm hoping when they say soon, they actually mean soon, and it's things like October, as opposed to, you know, sometimes when they say soon, they mean 2036.
Right. Although to your point earlier, I have AT&T. I'm still grandfathered into that unlimited data. As dumb as it sounds, I'm never going to let it go.
That's why I'm never leaving Verizon.
Yeah, so I'm paying for that contract fee anyway, no matter what. So I'm going to buy it on contract, and probably going to buy this. I've been waiting for a while to buy a phone.
Yeah, so why this as opposed to any of the other options?
Honestly, because I've just been waiting so damn long. No, truth of the matter is...
It's come too far.
It literally comes down to almost a fashion thing. Like, because to me, all the Android phones are good enough for what I want, what I need to do with it. Gmail, Twitter, Foursquare, sometimes, things like that. Instagram, like, it does everything I need. I just want a camera and I want a battery life that's going to last. I want notifications that aren't bad. No offense to the iPhone, but like,
no, and these
the Gmail app
notifications are great.
work.
This might be the best notification experience I've ever had.
And I might be the only one in the office who hates the One design, but I do hate the HTC One design. It looks
You're
good.
You're dead to me, Ross. You're dead to me.
It's the same thing that Sony argue with, like, bells and whistles. When you get in, you never use it again. HTC One looks gorgeous.
Yeah.
I think it looks gorgeous until I've played with it for more than a day and the back is scratched up. Or I have it on my desk.
I'm surprised by how many people who have it here that have gotten dinged up.
Yeah. Or I have it on my desk like this, and that whole wavy back, it buzzes, and it's metal on metal going, and like, I don't want that. I literally, I texted this phone like 5 times in a row for like an hour a day going, does this bother me? Does this piss me off? No,
you're
gentle
good.
buzz.
You're happy?
That, like, it's an experience thing, and like, we're talking qualitative versus quantitative, which unfortunately for us is like basically going to what Motorola wants.
Sure.
But they're right, and this is kind of what I want.
Yeah, no, I mean, I kind of agree. Again, I need to, you know, see if everything that they claim is true is actually true.
Right.
But if it is, I think, you know, I'd rather have a phone that works all day and does everything else well instead of a phone that lasts 6 hours and does everything else really well. Right. Like that's I'm happy to make that trade-off. And I think, I mean, if Motorola's data is right, a lot of other people are too.
Right. One final question, and then we're going to switch gears, get to the Verge cast, maybe take a small break. We've been here hours, like just preparing for this. Where does Motorola go from here? And the reason I ask, because like this is the thing that's bothering me so much. Motorola keeps saying we're past the specs, we're done playing the specs game, and I'm not entirely sure we're at the point where the specs have plateaued enough to say that.
I agree.
But like it's just almost there to like they're making a compelling case. But where do they go from here? Motorola's a company who's making a carrier thing. It's not really what Google does. Google's mantra is screw the carriers, we'll do it on our own. Moto's like, let's just do everything because we're an OEM.
Let's all be best friends.
What's next?
So I think, and I'm curious to know what you think about this too, but I think the PC industry is really instructive here, where we had sort of the same spec race where everything got better, everything got faster, everything got uglier, everything got cheaper, everything got sort of dumber and overwrought and unnecessary. And then we sort of pulled back. Which is not to say they stopped getting faster, they stopped getting better, but we started paying attention to design and battery life and how things feel and how they work. But I think what's going to happen here again is that we're going to have sort of a Haswell moment where I hope, this is my hope for like the next 2 years, is that somebody's going to come out with a new chip that it's better, as Haswell is better, but it enables different things. Like Haswell has graphics built into the chip, so you get better game support from even an Ultrabook or like a MacBook Air.
Right.
It has unbelievable battery life, so you, from the same machine you always had, just poof, better battery life. And I think in that sense, I think specs are going to start to go away from being objectively faster. Like by the time you're doing, you know, billions and billions of calculations every second, there's real diminishing returns. So the focus is on other things.
Right.
And I don't think, you know, I'd love to do 3D CAD modeling on my phone, but nobody needs to do that. That's not where we are.
It's not even a good hypothetical. You'd never do CAD modeling
no, well,
on
that's
anything.
The thing. And that's where, you know, we can build towards that in a spec race, but
Right.
we can also, you know, find a way to make our hardware do better things. And I think if Motorola can be in a place where it can get whatever the phone version of something like Haswell is, where it's better without being, you know, the absolute bleeding edge, but it enables things like graphics and things like battery life
Right.
and all this other stuff. I think that could get really exciting because Motorola is in a lot of ways ahead of the game when it comes to design and manufacturing, and they're doing a number of things really well. They have the size down, they've figured out some of the software and services, and now it's just a matter of they've sort of built a shell that they can fill with better specs as time goes on, and that's a pretty good place to be.
Right. I mean, I don't know. I mean, we trying to figure this out, and like this strategy felt very similar to how HTC was positioning itself early on with like the HTC One, the one device that matters. It's the flagship phone, and then as time went on, and HTC was doing worse almost. Like they were getting better reviews, but the quarterlies came out, and they just started releasing other phones. And they did hedge their bets before. There was the Windows 8X, Windows Phone 8X, which did okay for Windows Phone.
Sure.
It's the One Mini now.
I see a weird number of them in the wild.
Really?
I see way more than I see
Where are you hanging out?
920s or anything like that. Windows stores mostly.
Oh, well, there you go. Still mostly Samsung Android devices. No, but no, I agree. But
and that's part of the
just don't
problem is
know.
making a good device and selling a ton of them are not necessarily correlated. And if Samsung's really good at one thing, it's marketing everybody else out of the market. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting. But what do you think? Like, what a year from now, what should this look like?
And I can't really disagree with a lot you said, but I will say that the specs have to get better because it has to last longer. I think 24-hour battery life, that's enough. Like, I'm happy. Like when we talk about ebooks, like you and I very early on when we first met, one of the first things we did was like a Nook event.
I remember
it was like
that,
the Nook Easy Glow Light.
Yeah.
Glow Light. Sorry, Barnes & Noble and your subsidiary Nook.
The Easy Glow Light is the next one.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But we went to the event and they're like, oh, we've got 48, 36 hours of battery life. I'm like, or no, it was 2 months.
Right.
And like even for an ebook, I'm like, that's enough. I don't care.
Right.
Like,
They're going to come and be like a year, and I'm like, well, I guess that's better.
And for laptops, if you can have a laptop last a day or two, that's enough. And we're pretty much there with the Haswell. If this is 24 hours, the Droid Max is 48 hours. We're proving that we're getting to that point too. We're hitting this kind of plateau where keep battery life is, work on efficiency, but you can also increase the performance.
Right.
Now, the camera.
Right.
Which I need something better than this.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's great. The other thing I think is fashion. They've got the design down. I'm happy with this. I think Motorola, though, needs to sell it. And I don't know if they're going to do it. I like this phone. I don't know if people are going to walk in the store and go, well, I don't like the Droid. But if they don't like the Droid, they're probably going to get the iPhone.
Right.
I mean, that's the brand thing.
My great hope is that people know about this phone. And I think that's true. We were talking about this earlier. I think this is the third most hyped phone I've ever seen in my life. Behind the iPhone 5 and the Galaxy S4. I have people who don't know anything about phones being like, when's that new X phone coming out? I kind of want to get that. And I hope to God that Motorola can ride that into something for their own sake. But yeah, I agree. I don't know. Right. And cameras, I've sort of lost hope that cameras are ever going to get like really good, but maybe they will.
We'll see.
I hope so.
Well, this is my goodbye to the Moto X, because at this point I have to give it back to Motorola. You're keeping yours for review.
This is mine forever, and I am going to flee the country with it.
You mean you're keeping it on a 2-week review loan?
Yeah, basically.
Thank you. But that's time to wrap up because there's really nothing else to say. We actually have to play with the device more.
Yeah.
Get a good feel. Your review is coming up.
Yes.
You just finished this giant feature piece.
Yes.
Literally the minute we were going live, Dave was still writing it out. I'm sorry about that.
I think that's why we went live at 3:02 because I had things to do.
And you were still correcting things at
it's great.
3:04. But we're going to wrap up here. Your questions, hashtag Verge Q&A, we'll continue to answer them through our Twitter accounts as much as we can. If we don't answer it, it should be there in the review, which is coming shortly. We got to play with it more. Really figure out if this battery life is even close to what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Everyone, thanks for joining us. Go to theverge.com for more information. We're going to take a quick break. Get out of this suit. I don't know what I was thinking.
I'm going to get into a suit.
Getting it in suit.
Like
go relax, and as soon as we set back up, we'll be back for the Vergecast. So keep it locked, stay tuned, and thank you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Bye.